whether they got bodies of people from the graves or whether they got them from hospitals or prisons.
Unbelievable.
Robert Broom takes his corpses home. Ne? He was even a terror to his family. He would cut the head, top of the head, put the heads in a pot, that whether his wife is cooking soup next to him, and the wife had to keep the children away from the kitchen.
In a world where Africans have lost their roots, it has become of vital importance to document our ways. In an effort to reverse the brainwashing of the past, where we were made to believe our ways are demonic, we are pressed to create dignified and respectful platforms to unpack our spiritual ways. The views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of the guest and do not necessarily reflect the beliefs or position of this channel, its hosts, or affiliates. This podcast is a platform for open discussions and exploration of various perspectives, including controversial and unconventional ideas. We encourage viewers to think critically, do their own research, and form their own opinions. The content is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be taken as fact, advice, or an endorsement of any specific viewpoint. Viewers' discretion is advised.
Emane khupisa bo malamba ne khupina bobo bejane khokora mashampla ne banaba mubone ba una barinkampane kwache wangomane emane khupisa bo malamba ne khupina bobo bejane khokora mashampla ne banaba mubone ba una barinkampane kwache wangomane Emane khubusa bo malamba ne khupina bobo bejan khora mashampla ne banaba mubone ba una barinkampane khwaje wangomane Hormente hana plane di pane ga di kopane go masa go di gogwane magasa a di lakane gare lekane o thibile mowane matlho wa pelekane di tlhaka ga di tlhakane go bereka setsoswane le le tonkomane o sale bone ba o mosatsa mabane tlhakwana tsa bramane ka pitsa tsa mabutshwane bo pitile bojane dimpa tsa sepumpane di panwa ka di kruspane Money, 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 Emane khubusa bo malamba ne khubina bobo bejan khora mashampla ne banaba mubone ba una barinkampane khwaje wangomane Emane khubusa bo malamba ne khubina bobo bejan khora mashampla ne banaba mubone ba una barinkampane khwaje wangomane Emane khubusa bo malamba ne khubina bobo bejan khora mashampla ne banaba mubone ba una barinkampane khwaje wangomane Fanone ubaboni fanone ubaboni, 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 babina kamponi di kroni tsa sekoloni ba hupile temane ba moja se popoman bam tela ko ingilani bam jali ma eseman bam na telani le ma jeremani barapo ateman afiwanja tsa bone guridi kukune ba dimani ka yone le botseli ye ngeni o tsene ka chankani an khafura la yone temane money 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 hubusa bo malambani hubina bobo bejan ukora mashamplane banaba muboneba una barinkampane kwache wankamane Emane hubusa bo malamba hubina bobo bejan ukora mashamplane banaba mubaneba una barin kampane kwajiu komane emane
Moya light, Moya bright. Welcome to another episode of Moya Podcast, where we bring you the best in African greatness, where we try to recover and restore our history as Africans and get you guys knowing the history that you're not going to learn at the white schools. Such a privilege today. No, they're not going to get this. They're not going to get this.
It's var.
Yes. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Today I've got the great Kgafela wa Magogodi. If you've been in the poetry sections, you know he is one of our gods. Kgafela, you know, when I first started my journey with words on stages, you were there and you continue to be there. And to us, I mean, you're one of the torchbearers and the ones that are keeping the art alive. So it's such a privilege to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love the torchbearer part because it keeps the lights on.
Yes.
I think the burden of playing a god is too much. but yeah, wonderful introduction. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. So, you know, let's start from the beginning. We are here to archive our histories and the story of the Africans and the great people we have in Africa, because obviously mainstream media only covers the ones that are carrying their message and can be manipulated. So we have to create platforms where we have spaces for the future generations to actually know the truth about the people of our time. So can we start with your childhood? Like, where does it all start from? Who were you born from? Your clan?
Okay.
Yeah.
Ke sedibelo mollo se a sha sa tshologa ya re se tshologa metsi a falla metsi bile tshaba di putlela ke selo sa magadimantweng a ja ga gadimeng kgwedi tr e ja le sapo e kotame. So that's part of my spiritual biography. Ke kgawe ya mollo. I come from Bakhatla people. Yeah, Bakhatla ba Kgafela, those are my people. So those are the people inside me, you know, these are people who are also great astronomers of old, you know, because, you know, indigenous astronomy, the women, SSS, one of our writers, Dr. Moteo Koitsiwe writes, you know, he writes an entire thesis about this indigenous astronomy and how these women were the carriers of this intelligence, and then through decay pods, and they would have these signs. But this was also part of their divination system, you know. So so this is before I was born.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I'm still coming.
Yes.
So I was born go Soweto. I grew up go Zone 9, Meadowlands in Ndofaya. So I happened to be one of the first generation, the children of Ndofaya, those whose parents were moved from Sofia town. Of course, others came from other places as well. So our parents were among the first homeowners. So I went to primary school at Simologo Primary in Zone 9, Meadowlands, Ndofaya. I don't know if this is sufficient background or should I?
Yeah, no, keep. We're here to listen
Yeah,
about your story.
yeah. So yeah, I grew up there, you know. It's a very interesting thing because yeah, yesterday I was with the cat from that hood, of course, because we have a program there about, you know, which is basically about sweeping the streets with the power of sound, and you know, getting the youth to have a different courage by just inviting sound to the streets, you know. So we have that's how we're discussing that event that we want to do monthly at a street jam, Ndofaya street jam session. So as we're talking there, and then my childhood began. And I remember I wanted to tell them, and I didn't tell them yesterday because that, you know, there was just part of my upbringing. There was a club called Rangers, you know, because I love soccer. I still play soccer. I watch soccer. But I'm not claiming to be a star. I'm just saying
Yes.
it raises my vibrations. So. Now, what happens is that we grew up, and there was a team called Rangers, you know? And then because this is not mainstream media, so we can talk
Yes.
freely. And there was when we grew up, this thing, Barke Preza, and Preza is the owner of the team. So I followed this team called Rangers. Very, very, very powerful stuff. So my first hearing of poetry, there was a guy called Naledi. Ne? But poetry strata, you know. Naledi was an epileptic as well, so he could faint at the slightest provocation. But, you know, Naledi would be praising the team, ne? As it comes from the yard, you know, because the yard, you know, there was a dramatic moment, almost a ritual that we young boys loved, you know, when the team is going to play. So I love going to that ritual because these guys walked from the house, Preza, to the grounds, and then they were like in twos and in their you know, attire, ready to play. And then as they are moving, una lady would be praising them. Our Esteria box, I go back then, is a go back my hand. So it'd be going with this poetry, our secret box, going, and then but it's a fly, all these things. And I'm like, this guy, and when you look at these characters that he's defining, that's a fly would be a very thin guy, but he's gonna do you nicely, you know. And then there was Esther, my tongue. This guy was tough, you know, and there's a guy who was blocking the road, you know. We have all sorts of things, but Sugar Ray, you know, some of them even made it to professional. So this guy would be doing this thing musically, but as he's doing this thing, this preza had this song like thing going in, and he would say, so I come from a place of people about Tisamarete. Very, very powerful stuff in the fire, a place where people trust their fire. You know, this is who I am. Like, you have to completely trust your fire. And this is how we are raised, you know. I grew up in the black consciousness era, and then you needed to toughen up against the system. So no fire would mean that, you know, those of us who trust our fire. But also my parents, but some Mafikeng, so part of my upbringing, Jako Mafikeng, so a whole lot of these traditions also. The storytellers.
Can I ask you just to fix your mic?
Yes. Yeah. So a whole lot of these traditions, study storytellers, then would follow me as I'm moving around Mafikeng and so forth. An entire tradition of spoken word that comes from the old era, long before Motswako and all these things. You have storytellers, poets in the villages
Praise
that
poets,
I was exposed to, including my own grandfather, Gorapetse Khumanyane. So we had all this. So my upbringing, I think I have a very rich upbringing because I had this in thing between
words.
Soweto and
Oh.
Mafikeng, and everywhere there were words and music, floating around. I mean, including one of my favorite storytellers, Relidi Ndwana. His name was Mazizi, Isaiah Kumo. Isaiah was that kind of guy whom, like back in the day, we used to go to, we called it Brente or Bioscope, and then Narsina Saka, we'd like call recollect this 1 cent, 5 cent. Isaiah goes into the bioscope. When he comes out, and he tells you the entire story with actions and all. So he was my favorite storyteller. So I didn't realize as I was growing up, because I admired him a lot, even if he was quite a rough guy, Isaiah. We fought a lot, but I wouldn't say we fought because he was a bit tougher. So I think those fights were difficult for me. So Mazizi was, yeah, so I loved him for that. I didn't realize that I was picking up all these things. So my early upbringing, I was surrounded by these, township storytellers, spoken word artists, and then also in Mafike, the old tradition was there for me to harvest. So this is the kind of, I think, wealth that I carry with me. The people that I mentioned live with me, have lived with me ever since, and they continue to be the people inside me. So yeah, that's just
So
loosely.
how does the system affect you? Because I get it, poets are really, we mirror society, what's going on, and being this young person going to Ndofaya, like you say, it's that history of Sophia Town. How does that impact you as a young person? Or did you not even, you're not aware of what's happening? Or
Yeah, you can't grow up in Soweto and not be aware, especially in the 70s. I mean, I grew up with streets flooded with songs of rebellion.
yes.
Sekitotse molao wa mashinini. Tsietsi ngwana mashinini uintshwarele tsawa tsa tsawa. So these are songs that you grew up with. So a song about the heroes of 70s at the time when they were active, about Tsietsi mashinini, Khotso Siatlholo. I mean, for me, when I grew up, Tsietsi Mashinini was more than just a politician. He was a magic man who could disappear as the police were coming in. He would be, maybe say, there were stories about him, legend passing around that, the police would think that they've closed him down. He's in his house, they know. But then this girl would come out. No, Tsietsi hurting, but then, but that's Tsietsi going. His tennis balls, the kwai kwai, gone, lipstick. So actor, performer, that's drama for you, but drama that doesn't, at the end of the day, bow demanding you to applaud. It's just drama that is used in the praise of the struggle, and those are some of the things that one grows up to. So how I'm affected is that I love, heroes. I like people who challenge the system. I don't like stories of self-pity. So this is how it affects me. How do we effect victory? And this, I grew up in the 70s, right? And this is when the Black consciousness movement comes into being, or rather begins to hold sway. And I would prefer to say, as Kiam Patlele wrote in 1967, it's a new cycle of Black consciousness, because sometimes we have, with due respect to those who've said it, this idea that this is Biko's Black consciousness. My assessment is that Biko is a child. Black consciousness begins much more
Yeah.
You know, so I grew up in this environment of, you know, artists who wanted to move beyond self-pity. You see, Zexnda writes a beautiful essay in a book called Four Plays, where he defines the difference between protest and resistance. Because a lot of the times, people have this blanket idea that when you have politics in your work, it is protest. But protest is a very specific form. Zexmda defines it as a theater of self-pity, right? When you look at it, and in many ways, it's that kind of blues mode. Fanon also writes about that, the blues, the difference between the blues and the and bebop. You know, bebop is it's a much more urgent form, much more militant. We are fighting here. We are not crying. The blues is that guy with the, you know, a glass and a cigarette and crying for his baby or whatever. You know, it may be metaphoric, I don't know. But now, this is where now, when we come to theater in the 70s or expressions of black consciousness in the 70s, in the 60s, there was more of a protest mode. That's a Firetown culture. I really don't like pictures that come from Sophia Town, because it's that protest mode.
Yeah.
And then thankfully, you know, we had a different expression in the 70s. And when you look at, you know, characters written by Arthur Fugard, for instance, and then people like that, just the whole white liberal culture, it's protest mode. Ne? And the manner in which black people, because they like writing about us, I don't know why they don't write about themselves, Bofugato. So now black people in those stories cannot save themselves. If you look at them, they are all characters of self-pity. But where does that thing come from? Go back to 1964. There's a formula there. There's a play written by a lady called Bertha Ignos, which becomes a movie called Dingaga, same title, directed by Jamie Ace. Jamie Ace is the father of apartheid cinema, right? So now these guys work with the same formula where black people can't save themselves. The first scene in Dingaga, it's like it's supposedly an authentic native scene, right? The natives are there fighting, you don't know how they're dancing and fighting, you know, it's like, it's just normal. And then suddenly somebody has eaten a girl's heart. And then this guy now is distressed because that's his daughter, but he realizes that it is the Inyanga who has eaten the heart and the heart, and then this Inyanga, you know, white people, when they write, it's also the king. He lives on a mountain. So this guy is too powerful. So this guy can't challenge him. And then he goes to Johannesburg. The character is played by Ken Gambu. He goes in the 1964, I think. He goes to Johannesburg. When he goes to Johannesburg, he meets a good white man, and he tells him the story. And the good white man goes with this character to the village. And
Wakanda.
yeah, you know what I'm talking about. And when the wait, Simar,
Hey.
yeah, so the first thing is that when the good white man appears, the king and the guy who's been powerful, Kali came in. He doesn't. The white man doesn't have to do anything. He just has to appear. This guy runs and he falls off a cliff and he dies, and they live happily ever after. So white man as a savior. Now let's take that formula and bring it forward. You've seen yesterday the movie.
Yeah.
Right, and it's a very contemporary movie. And then you see that, you know, if the movie was made when I have a lot of medical doctors, friends who are medical doctors, and but you know, and it's made in contemporary South Africa. And here's a story now that happens in KwaZulu-Natal. And guess what? The only person who can heal them is a white woman. She's a doctor in contemporary South Africa. What is going on there? Right now, Tsotsi, the film, that, and this is why these things sometimes win awards, or often they are granted awards, because they are meant to demean us. You look at those, this guy can't be caught, ne? And throughout, and he's too clever for the system and proper. But in the end, as these policemen are chasing him, a white policeman appears, says, stop. And that's all that he needed, white power. And then he stopped. So the optics mean a lot. Yeah. So these are the things that create a kind of world that we shouldn't aspire to when we write, because I'm also working at Wits, right, where I teach drama. And you look at these images, and one says, but we cannot give the work of a Thorfugard authority when it's meant to demean us. We cannot give the work of Malcolm Pecky authority. So the entire tradition from the market theatre needs to be investigated up till today, but they still repeat the same formula. And why do they do that? Because it's also safe for the contemporary government. I'll tell you why. Because we live in a neo-colonial environment, let's face it. So when they give us these characters of self-pity, right, we can only see ourselves as injured, never as active beings, right, people who can change things, who can actively. So these guys are using this theater contemporarily. Look at this entire theater, the whole thing. If it's not the hero of the ruling party then, before we had the GNU scenario, in all these characters that they put on stage, you have this a nostalgia that puts you to sleep, that gives you pictures of victimhood, because then it is supposed to control you. When you can only see yourselves as injured, it's hard to move, to the next place. That's why people don't understand that the difference between crying and writing and fighting and combat, what Fanon calls combat. This is what resistance theater becomes in the 70s, and this is an environment that I grew up in now, and this is how I think, for me, the world receives me with, great vibrations, combat. And that defines the kind of work that I love to do, So this is how the 70s shaped me. I don't allow systems of oppression to shape me. I allow possibilities of liberation to drive me.
How did you find the pen?
Hey, is it the pen that I found? I wonder if it's the pen. When I went to high school, Mahigeng, Mabato High, and then we used to watch this pop TV, and this was the beginning of what became hip hop, and then you had, and this was also a period when disco was high. I had a friend called Trevor, I remember. We entered this competition. Now, I was watching these breakdancers, and Trevor was a disco king of sorts. Very good. I mean, that old, what's the John Travolta stuff. Yeah, Trevor could hold that stuff, So we enter, say, no, we needed money. I won't tell you for what. So we say, no, man, Trevor, let's enter. Then I go with the breakdancing stuff, because I was learning to do that stuff. And then, Trevor wins. Yeah, with the John Travolta. It was popular then. So, Nagatsitaka. It wasn't, people were still wondering what's wrong with this guy. So, but then, it didn't stop there. I won second position, right? I got second position. We used to dance in the streets. I was well practiced. So when we entered, it was fine. So what then happened is that I win this album by Gary Beat and Stevie Wonder, Right. People of the world, wherever you be, welcome to Cosmic University, where life is a journey and love is a trip, and the study of that will make you hip. I'm a professor of the rap, and when I speak, I guarantee that my lines would not be weak. They say my mind is a terrible thing to waste. That's why I'm here and on the case. So now, this is Gary B. But now, and I listen, now he starts telling the story of black people in America and their fight, because, and this is why in the song there's a Stevie Wonder line there after Gary Beat Hoyce's line. Stevie Wonder comes in. You know Stevie Wonder. You wear the crown, I wear the crown. You're the Stevie Wonder. So, but he says, so proud to say that we all wear the crown. You know, so, and I put these messages together and I realized that through rhythm, through word, there's something powerful that can be delivered. Because at first, before that, my own grandfather, Kgafela Khumanyane, would sit me on his lap, something which I sometimes didn't like because I wanted to play. I was a child, but he would be writing his stuff, right? So that's when I started realizing the association, man, because he was very musical, my grandfather. When he wrote Bagapudu mo akutwa mokwena bagamatshaba le khomo matogela temo ele se holela, you know, so I would be listening to the stuff, and yeah, and I suppose it started rubbing off on me, but then much more because now I found it later as a youth on my own, when I thought I had left my grandfather and his stuff behind, and then I find it on the dance floor. So this is is it the pen? That's why I'm asking, because this is part of what we call orecha. You know, this term was invented by orecha by a Zambian scholar in the 70s, I think, in the 60s or 70s, a contemporary of Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Basically, orality and literature as they come together. So orature. So we are people of orature. So I doubt if I begin with the pen. I think it's always rhythm and sound and whatever. Voice, yeah, because, you know, this form is ready. I mean, if you look, what they call the teller. In fact, matotsi, the teller, the shakers, and more, get drum, or so these are instruments of ritual, basically.
Yeah.
You know, Mudzunga Tabula, there's a scholar called Mudzunga Tabula, writes a beautiful PhD thesis. And in this thesis, he talks about Malombo musical arts, and he digs into these traditions. Tabo Maine, Batel, and these are my Chivenda is a bit awkward, but Bangu, I think they say Tere or something like. Bomaine, but these are Kibangoma, Sangomas who heal using rattles, rhythms, and so, and then Onale bo maine ba mutsuka, those who use song and herbs and dance, you know. So she writes about that, and this is for me what in the 70s, when the Malombo music tradition begins, was aspiring to, you know, bo Julian Bahula, A.B. Qindi, Ntate Philip Tabane. But it was much bigger than that. They were not creators of Malombo. They were children of an ancient form that, you know, was started by Abogogo. So we need to also dispel this notion that this thing started Ntate Philip Tabane. We respect him, yes. But he himself understood that he belongs to a great tradition. I mean, I've been fortunate to be part of a conversation, or to witness a conversation in Polokwane, where Tabang tells the audience about how he himself, Tabang Tabane, grows up and he sees his grandmother using the drum to heal people. People would come and tell their stories, and then, you know, seeking for salvation. And she'd never say anything. She'd play, and something would work out from that, you know. And this is where I thought Tabang understood the tradition, you know. So it's important that we correct the scholarship around what Malombo is, because it's an entire tradition.
It's not a person.
No, it's not a person.
Yeah.
It's a larger expression which lives today through people like Azar, through people like Bai Bai, because when you look at their drumming style, for instance, Thabo Rapo, we were discussing this thing, he's also a drummer. He was saying that, you know, for him, when he looks at Bai Bai and Azar, there's a tradition that they draw, which bring forward, which is the styling, the drumming style of Mabe Tobejani, and he himself would be then in the tradition of Opa Monaring. So there are many names that we can mention, you know, if we really are serious about scholarship around Malombo, then we have to also connect it to the spiritual traditions that, you know, are very ancient, that we can take back, you know, to times, to the morning of time, to use an expression from Credo, you know, Muto. So there are these things that we need to correct but we are not, you know, it's not a battle. It's because, you know, it's a iron sharpen iron. When somebody has shot anyana, God can knowledge you are so kyatlatsa ke lwane, so batho ba bang ba tlo nana re ke a kura, but a re kurisane, I'm a scholar, and also as a scholar, as I said, we are people of orature. I don't just read books, you know. I've been fortunate to be exposed to the old people who went through this tradition and became their friends, you know, people like Benji Francis, Becky Peterson, who were my teachers as well. People like Lififi Tladi, I talked to him. People like Motlabane, Mashiangwak. And the thing that I'm talking about, just talking about Motlabane, Mashiangwak, I love his signature. You know, it's a heart, right? The body is a heart. And then there's, on the one hand, I forgot the right or the left, but the one hand, it's on the tailor. On the other is the spear, right? So now a combination of spirits and warriorhood, spirituality and a sense of combat come together. And this was the 70s. This is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the kind of people that raised me, who understood also that the spiritual is not an attempt even to just simply go into a spiritual bubble and leave it there, you know. So there is a sense in which the spiritual can affect the material. So the 70s, another layer of that was how they invited spiritual processes in the fight for liberation. And this is not the only place. I mean, you go to whether Haiti or you come back to Zimbabwe. Let's start maybe in Zimbabwe. When you look at, they used to have what they call Bungwe sessions during the Chimurenga Liberation War. Ne? And then these camps would move because they're under attack. But wherever they moved, they always had a camp on the side, Yadingaka. And this is where these soldiers would come to seek salvation. And this is where the culture of drumming and song and poetry was encouraged to also get these people going. So there is always a spiritual dimension. You go back to Haiti. That's why I'm saying Black consciousness is much older than the 70s. You know, there's a woman called Cecile Fatima. We can talk about the three men. We know them. Bobo Bookman, Dati and company, Desalegn and all. But Cecile Fatiman is the one who leads the ritual, if we write history correctly. So maybe even our patriarchal sensibilities need to go when we go back to history, because we miss a lot. The ritual that liberates Haiti, you know, the entire thing is planned by her, of course, alongside other people, because struggles are always collective.
Yeah.
There's never an individual. It's always people fighting together. So these things for me matter. This long history of struggle, ritual, and how we come into, they all come into how I understand the art form that I want to create. It comes from, studying ritual. It comes from studying storytelling. I mean, storytelling is not something that we learn from the West, or even theater, which is regrettable because, I've often, yeah, but in Tshwarela, so I won't say names, but, this market theater types who call themselves thespians. And, I'm a thespian, and it's supposed to be a great and wonderful thing. This is just colonial mentality speaking. What is a thespian? There's an assumption by white scholarship, or rather, it's not even assumption, it's wishful thinking, that the Greeks invented theater, right? And Thespis is supposedly the first actor, right? So when people call themselves thespians, it's like that the magic of Thespis is upon them, whatever nonsense. But this is like, the joy of imbibing coloniality.
Yeah.
So now, here's the thing. Dlomo, H.I.E. Dlomo, a great playwright and theorist, writes these essays in the 1930s. And for me, these are precursors to what became the theory of black consciousness theater in the 70s, because he was beginning to talk about the theater that we write ourselves. And then he started studying, forms of storytelling and ritual. And this is all this information that I'm saying comes from learning what Dlomo also has, from learning from Dlomo. So Dlomo says a very powerful thing. Ari, the Sangoma is the first actor, right? And this thing, at first I was like, what is Dlomo talking about? But then it's not hard to imagine if you've witnessed the drama of bone throwing.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So because it's there's poetry, there's song, there's all sorts of words, and most importantly, the sangomas, man, they put you in what Marimba Ani calls sacred time, where the past, the present, and the future collapse. Now we live in a time where you are speaking to ancestors. This is what happens. Masap hour, time, linearity collapses. So and Marimba Ani calls this sacred time. So now I forgot. I'm excited. The concept of Marimba Ani. Please remind me, where was I?
You were speaking about about thespians and what drama is, where it started.
So Dlomo says that Sangoma is the first actor, right? So I would go more with that than this piece stuff, because then you begin when you start understanding ritual and stuff like that, because it is there, all our forms of ritual. Let me tell you a story. There was, if you look at Indaba, My Children, there's one moment where Credo talks of, not Indaba, Zulu shaman.
Okay.
He talks about how to heal a patient who believes that they are being, haunted, who are being haunted by a dog, and then they see that the dog is eating them, whatever.
Yeah.
So he says, no, don't argue with the patient, right? Take an invisible stick also and beat this invisible dog until the patient agrees. The patient agrees that you've indeed killed the dog. Now, what is that? That is physical theater. You're not saying anything.
Yes.
Hey, yo, hey, whatever. So that is what is happening there. So now, this is drama. Beyond just how fitla go didiamana shapela masapo, are tabana ya kgomo, what. So all these things, these are forms of drama. There's costume as well. Without Masela and Arba trusting her. So they've had to arrive Kamasela. So the props and costume and all that. Masapwa kidi. So if we think about it, and then because then how sheba nga kayo shapela dilo ke. Ya sheba and then vomani bo ne. What is vomani? That when we translate it to acting terms, it's suspension of disbelief. Right? Because you have to play this character, you have to suspend the disbelief that it is actually not real. Even for the audience, they have to voma that you are playing this character, and for this moment, this is the world that they are entering into. So we can't be taught drama. So it comes from rituals. In fact, there's a book by George James, Stolen Legacies, which is popular. Rastas love it, also, and Stolen Legacy, and all. So I will check a stolen, but that's long ago. You begin to see, and as George James says, the Greeks hate their historians. And there's a historian, I think Herodotus, a Greek historian. Why do the Greeks hate their historians and they love their so-called scientists? Right? It's because there's a problem there. Game problem. So now, it's because Herodotus, when he comes into Kemet, he witnesses these rituals that he loves, and wow, and he writes about them. These are rituals that they take and say it's their drama. So now they mute their historians, and they tell us about Barkimam Pythagoras, who also needs to be investigated because he was an ally of Alexander, the so-called Great, and then when Alexander came and colonized Kemet at the time, according to George James, this guy stole literally the knowledge that was there. So it was basically a case of just putting your name down on stuff that had been established long ago. But now that's more complex. I want to come back to my terrain, the theater, right? Now the theater, there's a Greek writer called Eurydice, right? I think it's Eurydice. If I messed up the name, it's fine. But he also writes a play called the Bacchae, or the Bacchae, but Baccae, something like that. But the most important thing about the Bacchae, or this Bacchae, it's written around the time when the Greeks were excited about these rituals that Herodotus describes. And when you look at the character Dionysus, it's a character that has been part of our rituals for a long time ago, called the character of Dionysus. My own take is that, let's call it the undying sage of the mysteries. And I will explain this concept of the undying sage of the mysteries. Because these are people who die, but they cannot be killed. They come back again. This concept, no, it wasn't Bigo. Who was it? Let's go back. Let's not get distracted. So now, the undying sage of the mysteries, then becomes Dionysus in the play Herodotus. But Dionysus is also some kind of Greek god. Now, Dionysus, mother. Again, now these guys are adapting our story. It's a virgin. Dionysus actually made water out of wine. That's
Oh my goodness.
And that's long before the era that we call the Jesus Christ era.
Yes.
And I'm trying to give you a history of adaptations.
Yes.
Right. And Dionysus comes from a character called Horus. So same character, so remade by the Greeks.
Yes.
The Persians create a similar character called Mithra. And these things are Googleable for those who like.
Yes.
Or those baratandilo, like so. So you can Google and check these things. But there are books that also guide you into understanding these things much more deeply. Desktop is just for you to Bonafena, but then you can do much more than that. So now that the Mithra is a figure that becomes Jesus later. I've given you the biography. So all these things are adaptations of African stories.
Well, myths and legends.
So there's a story ya Kgabo, as I said, ke Kgabo Mokhatla. But now in that story there are three characters that feature called Me Mogolo. The other character is called Mudimu, and the other character is Ntsanatsatsi. This is the Trinity.
Yes.
And this is long before the so-called the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. You see, they remove the mother, and then they say the Holy Ghost. Some people argue that Christians hate women. That is why the mother dies and the Holy Ghost appears in that Trinity. But this Trinity has been with us from ancient times, and then if you trace it back, because also there is something also that disturbed, or rather it doesn't disturb me. As I've said, because Afrocentric thought, a lot of it, because of the influence of the African Americans, there's a tendency to overemphasize Kimete. And then I've just given a Trinity that begins here, Mo Kgalagadi. Kgalagadi begins in the Motela Ravine, going further into Kgalagadi desert and what Makhoa called Kalahari. But now this thing is ancient. This is a story that is ancient. So the dispersal, if you read Indaba, My Children now, Credo tells you that the stories that I write there, Credo was such an incredible person. I mean, there are things that I worry about Credo that we can tackle if there's time. But he was such an incredible person in that he studied the rituals. He wasn't just into this thing, Amakemi and all. He studied theater across the continent. So he understood these things in detail. But also, he through methods of ritual and dreams, he brings us into this place called Kgalagadi. The first story, Yago Indaba, My Children, if you look at it carefully, the setting is around Kgalagadi. Those stories, Tabo Lumukanda, the immortal, even the first story of the beginning and all these things, the stories about Mamerafi and Odu, as they begin, the region is in the Kgalagadi. And then when Odu chases after Mamerafi, or the first mother, or so-called, catches a Kukumakhadi Khadi Lake. This is where Kgalagadi is. I'm able to hear these things closely. Makhadi Khadi is what in Credo Mutos Indaba, My Children is written as Makarikari. But now,
my gosh.
You need to understand, Osakar Credo was interacting with also people who he was saying the story, and there were people who were
transcribing.
So the hearing,
Mahua who were transcribing,
Andre Brink and all these so-called editors. So now the hearing is awkward, but now I grew up with the stories. So I could make, when I read Indaba, My Children, it's almost like I'm reconnecting with stories that,
oh my gosh.
We were told as children, through our grandmothers and all these things. So I'm able to recognize, or Makhadi Khadi also was at this lake, and then this is where Kgalagadi desert comes in, because then after the lake dries, we had this water body dries, then you had Kgalagadi desert means makhadi or khadile, khokhala is to dry up.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So, but these are just things that I'm piecing together as I'm also being taught by Honalil Tamalele Bareke Remotsening. So he's the one who's teaching me this history. As I said, we are people of Orecha. So Otlala Yimo Monaledi. So occasionally give chapel around when I forget something, I need a piece of history. So he's got this thing. Go Botswana, a place called Tabatsodilo. From a touristic point of view, it's called the Tsodilo Hills, and it's written in ways that you don't recognize how the mythologies actually lend us into the beginnings of time, and how these things are connected to stories that Credo Muda tells. And with that, those stories that Credo Muda tells, it's interesting that, for instance, Darwin in 1871 writes a book called The Descent of Man, right? And then he says humans come from Africa, and people doubted it. Okay, Darwin was rubbish, but he rubbished us. That's what I mean. But he did acknowledge that, the dispersal of humanity starts in the continent. And this is what really the first book and the second book of Indaba My Children are about, archiving the dispersal through fables that, as Credo says, our fables are wonderful in that sometimes it's like children's stories, but there's a lot of information, sometimes even astronomical knowledge, So we learned there in this place called Khalahadi through Credo. Then there's Sheikh Anta Diop, the Senegalese scientist, I think paleontologist who studied bones as well, and then using methods of radiocarbon dating. It gives us a similar history, so the so-called scientific and the methods of myth and ritual drumming give us the same result. So this is Credo and Sheikh and Diop. When you put them together, you find that, okay, humanity begins here. And for me, my interest is in, because I'm trying to trace the rituals, I'm trying to trace the storytellers from this beginning. And because I, as a teacher of drama and then spoken word, I thought I needed to invest in understanding things, especially from an Afrocentric perspective, because the kind of, when I went to Wits as a young student, we were exposed to things that demean us really, and this is the culture, as I've said, that was a colonial history. We were taught, colonial, to think in terms of, drama created elsewhere. I'm struggling to find the words, but the point is that here I am. I come into this space where I have been part of, because I joined the African Writers Association when I was 17. And I had access to these books, African literature. And then before I went to Wits, I was at Kenya College. So I come into Wits, man, and I'm like, no, man, So my starting point was a fight as a young student, because I remember first class Malcolm Pegg is teaching us Kaka Black Theatre. Within 15 minutes of the lecture, I was like, yeah, and I'm a first year student then. I said, no, Malcolm. So I started explaining. So, and then just to explain that, no, but what you're teaching is really not what I've been taught. So basically it was a teacher, don't teach me nonsense kind of moment. So because I was like, no, man, Look, maybe let me explain it this way, because I'm trying to understand just where I teach, for instance, because I think it's important to exercise the ghost of coloniality. I work there, so I have to constantly fight this ghost of coloniality, because these are the things that I had to encounter as a student, and these are things that I cannot pass on to my student. I cannot pass these ailments to my student in the form of knowledge. It's knowledge that is bigger than this, which is what I've been sharing parts of it. But now, what is happening is you enter the space, and then I decided I needed from that class. I decided I need to invest in this knowledge. Thankfully, I mean, even with my fight, Le Malcolm, you know what he said to me after class? He said, "Who are you?" I said, "No, but I told you my name." I said, "No. So tell me." I was doing first year then. "So when you finish, are you coming to teach in the drama department?" And I said, "Yeah, you must look for me. I'll be around." And thankfully, he knocked later. Even if I disagree with him, up to today we fight with Malcolm. But I have to give him that, he came back and he said, "No, come." Because he was poaching me from the African literature department then. I was a part-time student, a literature lecturer then under the tutelage of Becky Peterson, who is my guru really and supervisor from first year, So he was nurturing me. But then, hey, these guys were offering me a full-time job. Hey, Becky, man, I'm not far, I'm on campus. So that was Malcolm's doing. But yeah, I still differ with his world and his people. Because the world of theater, the kind of people that, taught us. Maybe let's start at the beginning of Wits University in 1920, right? Wits starts there, right? So now around 1925, they hire a guy called Raymond Dart, Professor Raymond Dart. Now, Professor Raymond Dart is a very, very interesting character. And for this story that I'm telling, read a book by, it's a 2016 book called Darwin's Hunch by Krista Coulter. Now, Krista Coulter deals with this thing, your foundation, your science, your Wits, because just briefly, Raymond Dart is the Kena Tosisang Philip Tobias. So, but I won't talk about Philip today. I'll talk about Raymond Dart and his friend Robert Broom. Raymond Dart, I think, comes from Sweden and then studied whatever. He studied on Asadi Bones, in America, and comes here and becomes the head of anatomy. As Krista Kuljan explains. So, and then he is also becomes the head of medical school and a scientist. And I'm saying scientist because really, let's go with this thing. Play me, because we need to think about what colonial history is and how we were taught, and how these methods were also not about science itself, but people arrive into what they call research with racist assumptions.
Yeah.
And they end where they started. So there's no science that happened, just racist nonsense.
Yeah.
So now, beyond the racism, these guys were also grave robbers, and Robert Broom and Philip Tobias, grave robbers and skeleton traders. Right, let me explain. Now, what's happening is that these guys, there was a large skeleton trade in the 1930s. As Robert Broom says it, the most interesting species are natives, who are the ancestors. And this skeleton trade, go as far as Columbia University, the British Museum, where I would be sitting here now as Raymond Dart and say, hey, I've got a nice Bantu species type of thing. Are you interested? Right? And then send it, and then, But this guy is based COVID, so that's where I'm coming. as a scholar and professor in the name of research. He's masking this trade, bone trading, you know. So and they would go to Northern KB to raid the so-called Bushmen. You know, I come driving now ka Empire Road. There used to be a thing called Bushmen, Bush. I think they showcasing Bushmen here, but I forgot the title of the thing. But Empire Exhibition, hence Empire Road. And you wonder why Empire meets Jan Smuts, right? So Jan Smuts was the prime minister then, was so-called a great supporter of science, but he was a friend of Robert Broom. This guy now, Robert Broom now, is a friend of Raymond Dad. Robert Broom was such a terrible guy. And very, very, amen, evil, if I may say it, because they would be, whether they got bodies of people from the graves or whether they got them from hospitals or prisons.
Unbelievable.
Robert Broom takes his corpses home. Yeah? He was even a terror to his family. He would cut the head, top of the head, put the heads in a pot, that whether his wife is cooking soup next to it, and the wife had to keep the children away from the kitchen. So now he wants the bones to, the meat to fall off, the flesh to fall off, and then he's got clean bones, and then, wow, British Museum, here's a nice Bantu species, right? So because now the skull is clean, and sometimes keep the corpse in the garden for the stuff to rot, and later he's got a full skeleton. So he was a big skeleton trader, this Robert Bloom, a friend of Raymond Dad. Now Raymond Dad is another one, and this year for my class, I want to do a project called Geri Geri. It's a woman that I think needs to be spoken about. Raymond Dad, Geri Geri is from the Northern Cape with her family. And then she's around 1920. So they used to be part of this Empire exhibition and so forth. So Raymond Dad had an eye on this 19-year-old. One day, I think it's at Woods Warren Hospital in Kimberley, Geri Geri is suffering from pneumonia. Now the superintendent, I think it's Dr. Nell or something, if I'm not correct, check Krista Fulger's book, Darwin's Hunch, comes, sends a text to Wits University to Professor Raymond Dad. He says, no, a bush woman dying. If interested, communicate. Now that is not science. That is skull trade. Now this is the guy who now and then he writes papers so that the university can give him permission to bring the skull from Kimberley at this and then to Wits. So now Raymond Dad had an entire collection of skulls, according to Kuljan, an entire collection that the size of a stadium FNB, so his passion for collecting skulls of natives, I think, was larger than his scientific rigor, if he had any. I doubt if he had science at all. So, and this is a foundation, so-called science professors and scientists who founded our university. So my project is to exorcise this ghost. And in fact, interestingly, Raymond Dad, the guy who stole Geri Geri's body, as I've said, I want to do this, devise this thing with students just to bring Geri Geri's voice alive, because I need to understand what happened in that moment. So Raymond Dad, the guy who facilitated this thing, had this, of course, why taller this body, I feel like Of course, it's a cast. It's a similar story. Sarah Bartman. There was a cast. Yeah, Gary. I think it's still there if you go and look. But also cast the private parts. Those guys were insane. These are so-called scientists, by the way. So cast the private parts and all these things, and they were interested in the large buttocks, about and the entire thing. It was an international thing. So these guys are busy. The scientists that as they also called. So and this is what I'm trying to do to exercise this course. So I was saying even when we talk about theater, we have a tendency to think that at Wits, for instance, theater begins in the 1970s at the Wits Theater. No. It's much earlier than that. In 1936, the first production, in fact, is by Raymond Dart himself, acting as Dr. Robert Knox in a play called The Anatomist, written by, I think, James Brady in 1931. So in 1936, James Barkima, another is Raymond Dart, who's the head of anatomy of it, and he fancied himself as an actor. Apparently, he was quite good with a booming voice, but he was so excited about the skeleton trade. And because the character that he was acting in The Anatomist is actually a story of a guy who in Britain was actually arrested, and he's an anatomist for what he bought bodies from two guys who killed this guy, 16 people, and brought them to his university for anatomical studies.
Wow.
So Robert Barkimam Tagoman, Raymond Dart acts these things. So it's almost biographical in a way. So the theater that I'm trying to exercise, this coloniality, has these traces of, things that we need to investigate. As Chinwezu tells us, the best way to decolonize is never to give the teachings of colonials any authority. We deny them authority. Yeah?
Yeah. I think we're going to need a part 2 with you.
No, there's a lot.
Yes, I can hear that.
Yeah.
I can hear that. Because we still want to unpack your journey with the word and theater, or like the 80s, the 90s, 2000, because it does evolve and change.
Yeah. I mean, we'll need part 3, frame by frame.
I think so.
Yeah. So part 2 may not be sufficient because there's a lot. I think I've evolved a lot.
Yes.
As an artist, and partly it's just it's not because you intend to evolve. It's just little things.
Yes.
As you go, you pick. I like this. Hey, here's a shake up. Guys are playing. Let me shake.
Yes.
And then you shake and you like it, and then you want to stay on the bandstand, and then you buy drums and okay, let me buy it. And then one day you are going to go now, and then you send out the word. Say, I could do this thing. On my own as well, but not that you want. And I hate performing solo because when other guys come, there's
energy.
color. So I mean, the stuff is always collective. Even if you can do it on your own, like I've done it, I think it would be greater when there's more of us. So, but then the point is that one has been evolving. So if we have to have conversations, let's take it slowly and with detail, because I don't necessarily speak about myself. My journey is an example of things that I've been through, and through these things, I'm trying to illustrate, Afrocentric thinking around the arts.
So would you like to close off our part 1 with song?
Maybe we could close with song, or we could go just pure spoken word.
That's fine too.
for different color.
That's fine too.
So that basana nor kya omella.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, akir now, there's a story that builds my play Chila Haibulai, right? And it's the story of the jackal and the dog. And I value that story so much. As I've said, our fables are lessons.
Yes.
The jackal has a particular character that is refusing to be chained. And the dog doesn't mind because there's something to eat. So the politics of the belly, right? And this story is not a story of yesterday. It's also a story of today. Yes. Right? But
Yeah.
So and in fact, Sobukwe loved this story when he was campaigning in the 70s, because it was an illustrated. So our stories, are not contained by time. So the story of the jackal and the dog still lives today. But I didn't go the Kwasuka Sugela route. I went something like, Fede bogologolo talare le mantshana se se mo inong dinageng ntša lephoko bja disampentšhe re shebelana ka marapo le mateng e le thagete dikoko tsa maburu di lahlile re nanabela ko re phuntseng teng kumkwa batla go jewa tlama rona bophoko bja re berekela maleng re kile ra wela kolobeng tsa maoto mabedi a ska re di re samile diretheng ra sutlha dipareng re kgoboga dijabana re sa bolo go gata magaleng me re melathwa re tlhagola re jala me re mejewa ko losilabeleng re le mmogo le nonyane tsa pula bo magwelele re le strong mo moweng mara once upon a time e lenyora le legolo la poka mo sekgweng magala ba omile no ka dikgadile e shele naga e le sheleng fele mja re romanna ko batho ke kope metsi teng ha sa le phoko bja letile le shekereng le tlhodi ya lenyora magalapeng le dibatana tsa metsi kubu le kwena thothi seyo ko banwang teng ditlhare di thotlhorega madiba a omile lefatshe le le manga megobeng di gwaile selo sa dikgwa sa wela sa le bakonkwe supileng teng a kgarakgatsega phoko bja re kgotsa mme o swetse mo tseleng a re kgotsa ko o teng tsela dithailo o wetse mo pitseng o feletseng peng ya re tsela e bodula kgaolanaga phoko bja totobela dikitšheneng kgathathu le mpjaga bo motho a thuma mafureng spetšetše le thekeng kgathathu monwana mo jemeng a ikutlwa bokhothane ka diketane molaleng kgathathu ba re bophoko bje makanyane re gana go golegwa fede re golegelwa eng kgathathu ba re ratile gore bo fa maleme mara re ralala fela fede re strong sprakating my people and I re strong sprakating re strong sprakating what a beautiful thing when the tongue is strong most sprakating re strong sprakating.
Tamaki, thank you so much.
Excellent.
Moya writes, well, you saw that we do need other episodes. I know that was information rich, so we will call him again. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. At the bottom, then the comment section, there's a $sign. If you want to send us some coffee, we would truly appreciate that. And just a reminder to please watch all the adverts. We need all the support we can get. See you again next time.
Who are you when all you were has been diluted by lies and white lines cancelling out all that which has been written of your history? Why do you look at yourself as a mystery? Doesn't the sun shine because you open your eyes? Doesn't the moon stay situated within the same stars your DNA sparkles off? Your spirit knows that surely corner into e off. Buza umoya so you may return to being well off. Because spiritually you are rich, yet your ancestors cry because you are out of reach. But yours is to command all elements while God takes inspiration from the very mirror she looked at to become. Remember who you are and never finish just when they think that with you they are done.